Hi, my name is Claudio Gallicchio from the University of Pisa, and I'm happy to introduce you this paper called Phase Transition Adaptation, which is a joint work with Alessio, Micheli, and Luca Silvestri. Well, in short, the goal of this work is to develop a training algorithm for recurrent neural networks to drive the recurrent layers dynamics to the so-called edge of stability. In the paper, we touch a number of topics in the area of recurrent neural networks and reservoir computing. So let's prepare the ground with a few concepts. We are in the context of recurrent neural networks. Neural network models naturally suitable for processing sequential forms of data. As it can be seen in the architecture, there is a feedback loop around a recurrent hidden layer that computes a state update equation, where xt is the new state, obtained as a nonlinear function of the previous state, modulated by a recurrent weight matrix, current input, ut, modulated by an input weight matrix, and the bias. This is coupled with a readout layer that computes an output function, such that at time t, the output is computed as a function of the updated state, modulated by an output weight matrix. In the standard setting, the model has a large number of trainable parameters, basically all the weight matrices and the biases that needs to be adapted by backpropagation through time. So there are cases in which training time is a constraint that you can have. So in these cases, the standard approach can have problems. And reservoir computing is an appealing alternative to this standard recurrent neural network design and training. The reservoir computing approach focuses on a major distinctive characterization. It is to decouple the treatment of the hidden recurrent layer from that one of the output layer. So in a sense, instead of blindly training the entire architecture end-to-end by backpropagation through time, we look at the recurrent dynamics under the lens of dynamical system theory. So this said, we have a recurrent neural network architecture again, as before, where the dynamical part is called the reservoir. And this is tapped by a linear readout. The crucial point is that this readout is the only trained part of the architecture. This means that the parameters of the state update are left fixed after the initialization, that is based on randomization, but subject to stability conditions applied to the dynamical reservoir system. Going a little bit more into the details, the reservoir can be seen as a discrete time nonlinear and input-driven dynamical system, which is ruled by a state transition function. And the parameters of this function can be left untrained as long as the implemented dynamical system satisfies a global asymptotic stability property that in practice is a fading memory property called the echo state property. Okay, if this property is in place, then the reservoir dynamics will be asymptotically dependent only on the input time series. And so in a sense, the activations of the hidden units over time become an echo of the dynamical input features. The state becomes an echo of the input. So in practice, the whole complicated process and time-consuming process of training the recurrent layer of the network is replaced by a very simple algebraic process of rescaling the spectral radius of the randomly initialized recurrent weight matrix W hat to a value smaller than 1. Good. Another concept is the one of the edge of stability. So dynamical systems like reservoir layers can exhibit a wide variety of behaviors, from stable to chaotic. Where for chaotic regime, we mean a condition in which the system state is sensible even to tiny perturbation in the input. So the region in the parameter space associated to a bifurcation between stability and chaos is called the edge of stability, or sometimes also the edge of chaos. Systems operating at this phase transition, like recurrent layers, have interesting dynamics. And for example, in the case of ecostat networks, it has been observed several times that in correspondence to this edge of stabilities, it is possible to have high memory capacity and good performance of the network. Of course, we don't want to claim that this dynamical characterization is always the right one to have, because, for example, in a supervised task, the right choice would depend strongly also on the properties of the target signal. We are just saying that if we don't know anything about the task to solve, or if we know that we are going to need a long memorization skill, then we find that this region, the edge of stability, is, as a guess, is highly desirable from the computational point of view. Okay, so this said, the edge of stability can be detected empirically by measuring the Lyapunov exponents, and in particular, as we are interested in the local behavior of the system around a given point in the phase space, we use local Lyapunov exponents, and as indicated in the formula in the slide, where this JT is the Jacobian of the state transfer function. The point is that if the maximum of this local Lyapunov exponent is larger than 0, then the system is unstable. If it is smaller than 0, then the system is in ordered regime. And our aim is to have, let's say, dynamics such that the maximum of the local Lyapunov exponent is approximately equal to 0. So we want to adapt the reservoir system in order to have this condition. And as a general aim, as a general goal, this could be very difficult to achieve. But fortunately, we can leverage the properties of specific reservoir topology, the so-called simple cycle reservoir. This is related to a relevant wave of works in the reservoir computing research that focuses on the study of the topology of the reservoir layer. So the idea is to try to generate a reservoir that is better than just a random reservoir. And a very effective approach is to design the recurrent weight matrix W hat as an orthogonal matrix, which has been shown to be associated to increased short-term memory and predictive performance with respect to random cases. So you can find more details in this famous contribution by Rodon and Tigno, but the main idea is that a simple way to achieve a reservoir system with an orthogonal recurrent structure is to shape the topology such that the neurons in the reservoir form a cycle. This is called the simple cycle reservoir and corresponds to a recurrent weight matrix with a very simple and nice structure where the non-zero weights are limited to the elements in the subdiagonal and in the top right. All the other sides 0, and all the non-zero elements are set to the same value, in this case W hat, which in practice is equal to the spectral radius of this matrix. All right, on this basis, we can introduce our algorithm, phase transition adaptation. We choose as our base architecture the simple cycle reservoir described in the previous slide, where the reservoir nodes are connected to form a ring. We modified it slightly, introducing in the state transfer function 2 vectors of 3 parameters. A gain, A, to modulate the net input of the state transfer function, and then adaptable bias B that we use to control the operational regime between linearity and non-linearity. So what we want to do, given the reservoir system in the equation, is to control the proximity of the system behavior to the edge of stability. To do this, we have to find a way to compute the local Lyapunov exponents of the system. And this in turn requires to calculate the Jacobian matrix and the eigenvalues. These mathematical steps are described in detail in the paper. The major point to observe here, though, is that when we compute the Jacobians of this system, we can keep actually the same simplified ring structure of the simple cycle reservoir. And this, after a few steps, implies that all the local Lyapunov exponents are equal. And follow this very simple expression that is reported in the slide. So to push the dynamics of the reservoir towards the edge of stability, what we do, we drive the values of the Lyapunov exponents towards 0. So to do this, we use SGD with momentum and consider the local Lyapunov exponent expression that we had seen in the previous slide as a sort of a loss function, an error signal. So the first thing to do is to compute the graded values of this error signal with respect to A and B, as indicated in the final step in the slide. Then we build the update equations where alpha indicate the momentum term. And finally, we obtain the expressions for the update rules, where eta is the learning rate. Okay, and then we achieve a training algorithm that is summarized in this slide, where the algorithm starts by initializing the ring reservoir with appropriate values. And then for every epoch, the algorithm first discards an initial transient of length tau, as usual in the case of reservoir computing. And then for each time step after the transient, the algorithm updates the value of A and B, which actually requires a number of intermediate steps. And the procedure is iterated until a maximum number of epochs is reached, indicated as max epoch, or until the value of lambda becomes greater than a tolerance threshold indicated by theta lambda. This value is in particular used in order to control the proximity to the edge of stability. Okay, so to summarize, we adapt gain and bias to have dynamics close to the edge of stability. The developed training algorithm is unsupervised, local, and online. And this means that the parameters are updated without target supervision at each input sample presented to the network, meaning that the network can adapt its parameters in an ongoing fashion during the exposition to the external stimuli and adjust the dynamics concurrently to the execution of the task at hand. Finally, the algorithm is also cheap, scales linearly with both in time and memory, and you can have more details on this in the proceedings paper. Well, we experimented our proposal empirically on a number of tasks, including the short-term memory capacity, MC task, which is a very well-known task in the area of reservoir computing, in which the network is trained in order to recall delayed versions of a white noise input signal. So in this case, we trained the readout in order to do this. And we use this as a purely memorization task. And then we also consider 3 more tasks that we call predictive tasks, the nonlinear memorization, NARMA 20 and Mekiglas 30. And the aim here is to exercise memorization together with nonlinear processing of the temporal information. All details on these data sets, the equations, the experimental settings are fully reported in the paper. So regarding the memory capacity task, what we measure is a squared correlation between the reconstructed signal and the delayed signal. So the higher, the better. It's also well known in the literature that the scaling of the input has a major role in the final value. So we call this the input scaling. We indicate it by omega. So we consider 3 values of this omega input scaling, 1, 0.1, and 0.01, in order to set up cases where the recall becomes progressively easier because the system is biased closer and closer to a linear regime. Okay, so in this figure, we report the value that we could achieve on the test set during the phase transition adaptation learning phase. And the results really clearly indicate that PTA progressively success in improving the memory capacity over the epochs in every setting. This is not surprising because memory capacity, it's known to be sensibly, let's say, dependent and let's say to the proximity to the edge of stability. So if you are closer to the edge of stability, then it's likely that you have a higher value of the memory capacity. But it's cool that actually in this plot, we can see that there is a great practical efficacy of the proposed training algorithm to drive the reservoir dynamics close to such a behavior, okay, where the memory capacity is maximized. The plot also shows interestingly that the training required always no more than 6 epochs in order to terminate, so it was very fast. And overall, we can observe that there is actually a substantial improvement, let's say from a factor of at least 4 times, approximately 4 times for omega equal to 1, the green line, up to a factor of improvement approximately equal to 9 for the value of omega equal to 0.01, the blue line. And in this table, we show the memory capacity score on the test set after PTA and compare it with the ecostat network and simple cycle reservoirs. So all details about the comparison and the fairness of the comparison, of course, can be found in the proceedings. We can see now that the results show that PTA is absolutely and definitely advantageous and reaches the highest values of the memory capacity in all settings. So what's interesting, for example, is that for omega equal to 0.01, memory capacity score close to the theoretical limit of 100 is obtained in the case of PTA. And also, for example, for even for omega equal to 1, the performance that we achieve with PTA is close to the one that you can achieve with ecostat network and simple cycle reservoirs in a setting that is, let's say, more facilitated, so much closer to the linear regime. So this is also a positive aspect of PTA. And in this table, instead, we show the performance comparison of PTA with ecostat networks and simple cycle reservoir on the 3 predictive tasks that we have considered, where we measure an error. So in this case, the smaller, the better. Also in this case, it is really evident that the performance is improved significantly for all the tasks. Okay, time to conclude. In the paper, we propose and present phase transition adaptation, PTA, that is a training algorithm for recurrent neural networks that drives the recurrent dynamics close to the edge of stability for the specific given input time series, and actually is able to control the proximity to the edge of stability. We show, in particular, these results through a number of mathematical derivations for the Jacobian and the eigenvalues of the state transfer function that uses the, let's say, the properties of the ring-restricted topology of the reservoir. And this leads to an algorithm that has a number of interesting properties, like being local, online, and unsupervised. Overall, we have shown that the algorithm can lead to considerable performance improvements on a number of tasks, both for pure memorization and also in the case of nonlinear predictions. And finally, we believe that this study opens several possibilities to further developments. And I think this is one of the most intriguing aspects of this work in particular. As reported in the paper, but let me just mention now that the properties of PTA are foreseen to be exploited in the context of implementations in embedded intelligent systems and neuromorphic hardware. And finally, this slide is to advertise a workshop of IJCNN that will take place in a few days on July 23. This is the first international workshop on deep learning in unconventional neuromorphic hardware. You are all invited to participate. Have a look at the program that includes both invited and contributed speakers. And well, that's all. And thanks a lot for watching the video. As always, we're very open to collaborations at all levels. So just drop me a line by email or get in touch by LinkedIn or Twitter. Ciao.